1958, rural China. A 5-year-old girl stands in a field, banging a pot with a wooden spoon. Around her, hundreds of villagers do the same. Drums, gongs, pots and pans, the noise is deafening. Above them, sparrows circle in confusion, terrified, exhausted, unable to land. The little girl doesn't understand why they're doing this, but her parents told her it was important because Chairman Mao said so. Kill the sparrows, save the harvest, feed the nation. Within 3 hours, the birds begin falling from the sky, dead from exhaustion. The villagers cheer, but they have no idea what they've just done. Within 2 years, 45 million people will be dead, and it all started with a sparrow. This is the story of the greatest man-made disaster in human history, a disaster that began with a simple question: what happens when you declare war on nature and win? In 1949, Mao Zedong stood in Beijing and declared the birth of the People's Republic of China. He inherited a nation of 600 million people, mostly farmers, mostly poor, mostly using farming techniques unchanged for centuries. Mao had a vision. He would transform China from a backward agricultural society into a modern industrial superpower. He would do it in 15 years, and he would catch up with Britain and America. He called it the Great Leap Forward, and it was the most ambitious economic program in human history, but it would become the deadliest. The plan was simple: collectivize the farms and create massive communes where thousands of families would live and work together. Melt down every piece of metal into steel and build China's industrial future with the sweat of 600 million hands. To pay for this transformation, Mao needed to export grain, lots of it. So he ordered the peasants to grow more, much more. Local officials, terrified of displeasing the chairman, reported impossible harvests, claiming yields had doubled, tripled, even quadrupled. These numbers were lies, but Mao believed them, and then he saw a problem: sparrows. Those small brown birds that hopped through the fields eating grain from the harvest. Mao did the math, or rather, someone did it for him. Each sparrow eats about 4 pounds of grain per year. Multiply that by hundreds of millions of sparrows, and the birds were stealing food from the mouths of the Chinese people. The solution was obvious: kill them all. In February 1958, Mao launched the 4 Pests campaign. The enemies of China were declared: rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. The campaign against sparrows was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Nests were torn apart, eggs were smashed, chicks were killed, and adults were shot with slingshots and air guns. But sparrows are clever. They learned to avoid the guns, so the Chinese people found another way. They would simply exhaust them to death. Sparrows cannot fly for more than 15 minutes without rest, so if you prevent them from landing, they will eventually fall from the sky. Across China, millions of people took to the fields with drums, pots, pans, and gongs. They banged and clanged without stopping for hours, sometimes days. Children climbed trees to shake the branches, while factory workers stood on rooftops waving flags. The noise was relentless, and the sparrows flew in circles, desperately searching for somewhere to land. One by one, they dropped. Hearts burst from exhaustion. The people collected the bodies in piles, and some villages reported killing tens of thousands in a single day. By the end of 1958, the government claimed nearly 2 billion sparrows had been eliminated. 2 billion. The species was nearly extinct in China. And then Chairman Mao received reports of the greatest harvest in Chinese history, with officials claiming grain production had doubled. The Great Leap Forward was working. Except It wasn't. The harvest reports were lies. Terrified officials had exaggerated everything, and the real harvest was actually lower than before. And something else was happening, something no one had predicted. Without sparrows, the locusts came. You see, sparrows don't only eat grain, they eat insects, lots of insects, especially locusts. A single sparrow can eat hundreds of locusts per day. With no sparrows left to control them, locust populations exploded and swarms descended on the fields. Millions upon millions of insects eating everything in their path. The crops that survived the harvest lies were devoured by locusts. By 1959, food production had fallen by 15%. By 1960, it had collapsed to 70% of normal levels. And then came the drought, and the floods, and the complete breakdown of the food distribution system. The perfect storm had gathered, and famine swept across China. In the countryside, people began to starve. First, they ate the emergency grain reserves, then the seed grain meant for next year's planting, then the animals, dogs, cats, rats, anything that moved. Then they ate the bark from trees, the roots of plants, the leather from belts and shoes. Then they ate earth. They called it guanyin soil, a white, calcium-rich clay that could fill an empty stomach, but provided no nutrition. People who ate it died anyway, their intestines blocked, their bodies wasted. A survivor named Ju Erge later recalled, "We ate whatever there was to eat. Grass roots, tree bark, corn stalks, sweet potato leaves. You could see people everywhere eating things like that." But even these desperate measures were not enough, and the death toll began to climb. In Anhui province, 18% of the population died. In some villages, half the residents perished. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried, limbs stuck out from shallow graves, and corpses lay by roadsides, too numerous to move. Yu Dehong, secretary to a party official in Xinjiang, recalled, "I went to one village and saw 100 corpses, then another village, another 100 corpses. No one paid attention to them. People said the dogs were eating the bodies. Not true, I said. The dogs had long ago been eaten by the people." And then the unthinkable happened. Reports began to surface of cannibalism. Not rumors, not propaganda, but documented cases investigated by police and recorded in official files. In Anhui province alone, 1,289 cases of cannibalism were documented in 1960. 1,289 cases in one province in 1 year. Parents ate their children, children ate their parents. Some families could not bear to consume their own, so they traded. They exchanged children with other families and ate. Yang Jisheng, a Chinese journalist who lost his father to the famine, spent years documenting these horrors. He wrote, "Parents ate their own kids, kids ate their own parents, and we couldn't have imagined there was still grain in the warehouses. At the worst time, the government was still exporting grain." That is the most damning fact of all. While tens of millions starved, China continued to export grain to pay off foreign debts and maintain international prestige. The warehouses were not empty. The government simply chose not to open them. Local officials who reported the true situation were punished, labeled as rightists, and sent to labor camps. One county party secretary tried to send a letter directly to Mao describing the starvation, and he was arrested and imprisoned for 20 years. The message was clear: report good news or suffer. So officials kept reporting impossible harvests, and people kept dying. By April 1960, even Mao could no longer ignore the disaster. He quietly ended the sparrow campaign, and the birds were removed from the pest list, replaced by bedbugs. China even began importing sparrows from the Soviet Union, but it was far too late. The ecological damage was done, and the famine was unstoppable. For 3 more years, the dying continued. When it finally ended in 1962, the toll was almost incomprehensible. The Chinese government officially acknowledged 15 million deaths. Independent researchers estimate the true number is much higher, 30 million, 40 million. Some scholars say 45 million. Others calculate 55 million. The exact number will never be known, but by any measure, it was the deadliest famine in human history, more than the Irish potato famine, more than the Soviet famines under Stalin, more than all the famines of the 20th century combined. And it was entirely man-made, caused by lies, by political terror, by ideological blindness, and by one catastrophically stupid decision: kill the sparrows. Here is what makes this story so devastating. It wasn't random cruelty. It wasn't intentional genocide. It was a sincere attempt to help. Mao believed he was saving China, modernizing the nation, feeding his people. He simply refused to accept that nature had rules he could not break. Man must conquer nature. That was his slogan. Make the high mountain bow its head. Make the river yield the way. He believed humans could bend the natural world to their will through sheer force of revolutionary enthusiasm. He was wrong. The sparrows were not pests stealing grain. They were a crucial part of an ecosystem that had evolved over millions of years. Remove them, and the system collapsed. The locusts that followed were not bad luck. They were the inevitable consequence of disrupting a food chain. Nature does not care about 5-year plans. Nature does not respond to political slogans. Nature simply is. And when you declare war on nature, nature wins. Every time. There is one more detail that haunts me. During the sparrow campaign, some birds fled to foreign embassies. They had learned that within those walls, they would not be attacked. At the Polish embassy in Beijing, hundreds of sparrows took refuge on the roof. The Chinese government demanded the embassy hand over the birds, but the Poles refused. So for 2 days, hundreds of Chinese citizens surrounded the embassy, banging drums. Finally, the Poles gave in and allowed the sparrows to be driven out, and the birds were killed. Those sparrows understood something that Mao did not. Sometimes, the safest place is the one that refuses to follow order. Today, the Great Chinese Famine is rarely discussed in China. The government calls it the 3 years of natural disasters. They blame droughts, floods, and bad weather. The sparrow campaign is barely mentioned, and the true death toll remains classified. Yang Jisheng, the journalist who documented the famine in his book Tombstone, has never been allowed to publish it in mainland China. When Harvard University awarded him a prize for honest journalism in 2016, he was not allowed to leave the country to accept it. The truth remains dangerous, but the sparrows have returned. Slowly, over decades, their populations recovered. Today, you can see them again in Chinese cities and villages, hopping through fields, eating grain, eating locusts, doing exactly what sparrows have done for millions of years. They don't know about the Great Leap Forward. They don't know about Chairman Mao. They simply exist, part of an ecosystem, neither good nor evil, just necessary. The next time you see a sparrow, remember this story. Remember the children banging pots in the fields. Remember the 45 million who starved. Remember what happens when we believe we are smarter than nature. The sparrow weighs about 1 ounce, less than a smartphone, and yet removing it from the ecosystem triggered the worst famine in human history. Every species matters. Every connection matters. Every piece of the web of life matters. Break one strand, and the whole web can collapse. That is the lesson of the sparrows. That is the lesson Mao never learned. The question is, have we? Around the world today, species are going extinct at 1,000 times the natural rate. Insects are disappearing. Pollinators are dying. Food chains are collapsing. We tell ourselves it doesn't matter. We tell ourselves we can manage without them. We tell ourselves we are smarter than nature. We are not. The sparrows knew. 45 million people learned the truth too late. Let us hope we learn it in time. There is a final irony to this story. The Great Leap Forward was supposed to make China self-sufficient, independent, and strong. Instead, it made China dependent on grain imports for years. It set back industrial development by decades, and it killed the very farmers who were supposed to build the socialist paradise. Mao Zedong remained in power until his death in 1976. He was never held accountable for the famine. In official Chinese history, he is still considered 70% correct and 30% wrong. The famine is part of that 30%. 45 million deaths, 30% wrong. That is how history sometimes records its greatest crimes. Not as crimes at all, just mistakes. But the survivors remember. In villages across China, there are still elderly people who lived through those years. They remember eating bark. They remember burying their neighbors. They remember the silence of the fields when no birds sang. One survivor, now in her 80s, said, "I cannot throw away food, even a single grain of rice. My grandchildren think I am crazy, but they did not see what I saw. They did not eat what I ate. They do not know how precious each grain truly is." That is the inheritance of the Great Famine. Not just the death toll, but the trauma passed down through generations. The fear of hunger that never fully goes away. The knowledge that civilization is fragile, that plenty can become scarcity overnight, that one bad decision multiplied across a nation can kill more people than any war. So what can we learn from this tragedy? First, nature is not our enemy. The sparrows were not stealing from China. They were maintaining a balance that had existed for millennia. And when we disrupt ecosystems, we rarely understand the consequences until it is too late. Second, ideology is dangerous when it ignores reality. Mao's belief that revolutionary enthusiasm could overcome natural laws was not unique. Throughout history, leaders have convinced themselves that their vision was more important than facts, and the results are always catastrophic. Third, silence kills. The officials who knew the truth were afraid to speak. The scientists who understood ecology were ignored or punished. And the journalists who might have reported the famine were silenced. When truth becomes dangerous, millions can die before anyone admits there is a problem. Fourth, numbers can hide humanity. 45 million is just a number, but each of those 45 million was a person, a mother, a father, a child, someone who was loved, someone who had dreams, someone who deserved to live. When we reduce tragedy to statistics, we lose the ability to feel it, and we must never let numbers blind us to the human cost. Finally, we are not as smart as we think. Every generation believes it has conquered nature, and every generation is wrong. We have split the atom, we have walked on the moon, we have decoded the human genome, and still we cannot create a single sparrow. We cannot build an ecosystem from scratch. We cannot predict all the consequences of our actions. Humility is not weakness. Humility is wisdom. The sparrows knew their place in the world. Mao did not know his, and 45 million people paid the price. I will leave you with one image. It is 1963 and the famine has finally ended. A young boy walks through a field that was once filled with corpses. The crops are growing again, not as well as before, but growing. And above him, a single sparrow circles. It lands on a branch, chirps once, twice, then flies away. The boy watches it go. He does not know that this bird's great-grandparents were hunted to near extinction. He does not know how many people died because of that hunt. He only knows that the sparrow is back, and somehow, that feels like hope. The natural world has a way of healing itself, if we let it. If we stop declaring war on things we do not understand. If we learn to live within the web of life instead of trying to control it. The sparrows have forgiven us, but the question is whether we can learn from our mistakes or whether we will make them again. Different species, different ecosystems, same hubris. The choice is ours. It has always been ours. Choose wisely. Nearly 45 million people died in the Great Chinese Famine. They died because a leader believed he could conquer nature. They died because people were afraid to tell the truth. They died because a small brown bird was labeled an enemy. Remember them. Remember the sparrows. And never forget what happens when we believe we are gods.